So everyone, as we have been for the last few weeks, this is a deep dive. This is our music lecture series aimed at absolutely everyone. You don't have to be a music academician in order to, that's not even a word, an academic musician, in order to be able to appreciate these lectures. They're aimed at absolutely everyone. And this particular subject is one that is near and dear to my heart. This is film music. And most of us can whistle at least a few film tunes. And chances are, throughout today, you'll hear about composers who wrote some of those tunes that you know so well. And this is not the image I shared with you last week. It was a rather dry image of a lady sat at an organ console. But as the talk has taken shape this week, well, it's been very clear we need to pay reference to another enormous figure, not just the mighty Wurlitzer, but the mighty Kong himself. So let's jump in at the very start. Welcome, everyone, to our sequel presentation, the second in a series of deep dives all about the classical origins of film music. Last week we began in silence and burst into sound with the earliest film music played by pianists in those rather run-down tatty Nickelodeons. And this week, in the next thrilling instalment, we will look at a fascinating story that starts in Birkenhead on the Wirral. It takes in sabotage, intrigue, threats of war, a genius fleeing persecution, all the way to the jungles of Skull Island before finally plummeting off the Empire State Building. Quite a journey. Come with me, ladies and gentlemen, and let's meet this chap here. Now, if there ever was the epitome of a modern major British organist, well, it's this chap here. He looks the part, and believe you me, this is the organist's organist. Everyone, this is Robert Hope Jones, who was born in 1859 and died in 1914. He's an English musician who's considered to be the inventor of the modern theatre organ in the early 20th century. He was born and brought up in the Wirral, in particular Birkenhead near Liverpool, and he was a very successful local organist with a keen interest in technology, particularly electrical engineering. And whilst he played the organ at various churches at weekends, having been brought up in this tradition, his day job was working for the telephone company, which of course in the late 19th century was very active in laying new lines and developing new technologies. And because he was so interested in electrical engineering, he is actually credited with coming up with a whole load of different technological innovations that we still use today, including the very first compressors which were used in handsets and headsets in order to take your voice and amplify it so it had enough clout and power to be heard by the people at the other end. And variants on this technology are still used today. He also invented something called the diaphone. Now, we'll hear more about this later on in the context of the mighty Wurlitzer, but its more common use, and is still in use today, was as a foghorn. The diaphone is able to produce deep, powerful tones that can travel vast distances. Now, in about 1889, Hope Jones resigned from the telephone company to devote himself to improving the church organ, which is a subject that he'd been really quite occupied with for much of his spare time for years. Now, at first, Hope Jones devoted himself really to the brains of the operation. He'd come up with the innovations, and he would employ and license a score of organ builders who would carry out and implement his inventions. But as these organ builders didn't really have, I suppose, the technical know-how to be able to do this correctly quite often, and many of the results of these early relationships proved unsatisfactory, he entered the field as an organ builder himself. Now, unfortunately, this meant he became a rival and a competitor to many of those who'd worked for him and had previously profited from his inventions. And many of them became openly hostile and abusive. And you can see why. His new inventions were going to put them out of work. This often meant things like the console, where the keys are kept, was separate from the actual organ itself. So the console could be anywhere in the church, and the electrical action would trigger the pipes. This, amongst other major innovations, made him a target for all sorts of attacks, including against his electrical knowledge, his musical taste, his voicing ability in his playing, his financial standing, and even his personal character, leading him to flee to America ultimately, but not before making some fairly significant sales here in the UK. And in the year 1895, what was practically the first ever Hope Jones electric organ sold was set up here in St George's Church, Hanover Square in London. And those in Choir of the Earth will be very familiar with this church, as they have sung quite recently along with the new organ there. But this first Hope Jones organ created a huge furor. And that was cut short by a fire, which destroyed the organ and much of the tower of the church. With curious timing, literally almost immediately after this fire had happened, attention was directed to, and I'm going to read this quote, the danger of allowing amateurs to make crude efforts at organ building invaluable in historic churches and to the great risk of electric actions. Now, there was a substantial police investigation, and in the end, arson was the conclusion. And so the authorities of the church ordered from Hope Jones a similar organ to take the place of one that had been destroyed. And the console for this Hope Jones organ is still in St George's, Hanover Square. And so you can see Hope Jones' time in the UK was really quite much under threat, and he fled to the USA, where because he wasn't actually a very good businessman, he ended up working for the Wurlitzer company, a nascent organ company in the USA, and he developed what then became known as the mighty Wurlitzer, this enormous organ which could be installed into the movie theatres of the early 20th century, and it could take the place of a 25-piece orchestra and a rhythm section. And Philip Hope Jones is credited with inventing and developing several key voices which were only ever used in theatre organs. If you've ever heard a theatre organ playing along with a movie, you know exactly the kind of sounds I mean. The tibia clausa, which is a large double-stop flute which typically has quite a fast tremolo on it. The diaphone, as we saw earlier on, the foghorn, which is a powerful bass stop with a moving resonator, which creates these deep, threatening sounds, which would be completely out of place in a church, but are perfect for the movie theatre. He also developed, this is an incredible innovation, close imitations of several orchestral instruments. I've got a huge list here, and just to choose a few at random: the marimba, the xylophone, the harp, cathedral chimes, the bass, kettle and snare drums, gongs, tambourines, strings, trumpets, as well as sound effects to use with silent films, including the doorbell, bird call, auto horn, sleigh bells, train whistles, thunder, galloping hooves, even a grand piano, all accessible from the console. So the mighty Wurlitzer became a huge seller in the early 20th century, particularly the 1920s, to create this vast orchestral sound without the cost or space requirements of an actual ensemble, because you could put the organ console anywhere in the theatre. Most notably, they would be usually in front of the screen in the pit and would sometimes rise up grandly as the music played, but the pipes and the machinery itself was often placed behind the screen or up in the rafters so that the sound could fill the theatre, but there was plenty of space for seats, which of course is where the money was. Now you can see here these consoles were absolutely huge. Each of these keyboards is known as a manual, so you had 4, sometimes 5, even 6 manual keys on these organs. You had vast pedal boards to be played with the feet, and all of these different stops and sounds could be set up and programmed so that if you knew which film it was you were accompanying, well, you could set it all up to play beforehand, and then you would just play along. Now, I want to show you first of all a clip from a fantastic video on this channel here, the MN Original channel. I've linked to all of the videos in today's lecture in the description, and I urge you and encourage you to go subscribe to their channels and watch the full videos, because they are very, very interesting, illuminating. And this is all about the Wurlitzer theatre organ. Here is our first clip, everyone. Enjoy.
Tuned sleigh bells, cathedral chimes, a marimba, and when you put them all together, it's a lot of fun.
Now just look at this. Isn't that just amazing? Built into the actual infrastructure of the theatre are the full range of instruments, but it's all controlled from this electrical console. So the mighty Wurlitzer was a key feature of these early movie soundtracks, these early movies, including by Buster Keaton and by Charlie Chaplin, which of course were huge sellers. But it's not just the instrument. There was of course a whole infrastructure and ecosystem around these instruments, including books just like that one I showed you last week for pianists, but for organists, which featured descriptions and hints like this one following. So you can see here in this edition, which you can find if you just Google that particular that particular front page here, Theatre Organist Secrets PDF. You can see the whole thing. And someone has written in here, you know, snore, laughter, kiss, page 3, airplane, page 5, dog bark, page 8. So you can see exactly how to achieve the effect. So if we have a look at laughter, for example, there's some suggestions at the top as to some stops you might want to use. The vox humana, the human voice, for obvious reasons. That tibia I mentioned, which is that fast, fluttering sort of flute sound with tremolo. It says the effect of a person or persons laughing will often literally make certain comedy scenes. It can be easily produced on most theatrical instruments. Starting a little above middle C, strike a handful of keys, all in the notes of an interval between a fifth or a sixth in a crisp staccato manner with the flat of the right hand, like this. Repeat 4 to 6 times, striking a third or so higher each time. You can put a crescendo in with the swell pedal. The difference between a man's and woman's laughter can be made by playing lower or higher, as we previously indicated. So this is really very specific stuff to allow organists to accompany a film and to add delight, to make the audience laugh. You'll see in a minute the effects that this has. This is a yell. This is a shout. With the flat of the hand, strike a handful of several keys in the upper register and slide the hand down across the keyboard in glissando fashion for about an octave. The attack should be made with a rolling motion of the hand. The idea not to strike the whole handful down at once, but rather to add more as the glissandos commence. So something like this. Now notice the notes are really close together at the top, like that. And that is a yell. It's best to have the swell box open and a slight decrescendo, so something like this. Now, the effect need not necessarily be used only in scenes where a person is shown yelling or screaming, but may also be employed to good advantage accompanying comedy falls, blows, and sudden surprise or flight. So the amount of thought and care that was going into these sounds created by these organs was absolutely huge. I'm going to show you a little excerpt from a film. I do thoroughly recommend after this broadcast you go and you watch the full video, which is linked in the description. Please do subscribe to Russell Smith's channel. He's posted this. It's about a 15-minute presentation recorded in 2013 by the theatre organist David Jolson, who played this instrument in New South Wales in Australia. And just as you're listening, just note how much detail David is able to put into the film, how many of the action scenes and how many of the action sync points where the music reflects what's going on screen he is doing. This is absolutely amazing. Here we go. So you get the idea. The tension created by the music being played live really was transformative to these early films, but it was not to last, I'm afraid, everyone. Whilst the mighty Wurlitzer reigned supreme for a short time, just around the corner a new kind of sound lurked. The advent of the talkies was upon us, and it was this film here, The Jazz Singer, which featured the first fully recorded soundtrack. And you might think, well, you know, the first time people heard singing in a film, they would have been amazed. But of course, they'd had recorded singing in films for a while. You could play a recording along with a silent film. Sometimes even films employed actors to stand behind the screen and talk along with the silent film, but it was never entirely in sync. It wasn't the singing of the jazz singer that people were most mesmerized by. It was the talking. It was the fact that Al Jolson, who was the star of the jazz singer, was ad-libbing in between songs, and you could clearly see it was his voice coming out of his mouth. This changed cinema forever. This had never been heard in a movie theatre before. The world would never be the same again. Now, this is another fabulous video, which I do recommend. It's from the channel Porful Popnecker. So do go and support dear Porful. You know, the world needs more Porfals. And do watch this video in its entirety. But I want you to watch this. Is the moment where the audience has heard Al Jolson's voice. And there's a lovely little Easter egg. Just listen to what the first real spoken words are ever in a movie. I love this. Here we go.
That's what they say, but to me, he's an angel of a joy. Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. Lou, listen. Play Toot Toot Tootsie. 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead. Nothing but blue skies from now on.
There you go. As I say, the first words in a talkie. You ain't heard nothing yet. He wasn't wrong, was he? Now, talkies, as they were known, were suddenly everywhere, and musicians, much like my screen here, were suddenly left in the dark. They lamented as their main source of income suddenly dissipated. Orchestras were disbanded in their thousands. They were no longer needed. Pianos in theatre fell out of favour, and in fact even the mighty Wurlitzer, which had been installed at great expense only a few years previously, was relegated to the job of playing interval music and to providing a bit of background before the main scene started. And so you might think that, that's the end of things. But no, things were just getting started. Not just with the advent of talkies upon us, the advent of the first true soundtracks was just around the corner. And it's largely thanks to this man here. With the world changed forever, it was time for a new breed of composers. Those who would compose intricate film scores, complete with those points, as you saw with the Wurlitzer, where the music would respond almost instantaneously to the action on screen, a technique known as either hit or sync points, where the music is synced to the action on screen. And enter this man here. This, everyone, is Max Steiner. Now, he was born in Vienna in 1888 and trained as a classical musician in the Austro-German Romantic style, before moving to England to work as a conductor and a composer in 1907. And he was very, very successful. However, the outbreak of the First World War 7 years later led to him being interred as an enemy alien. And that was nearly the end of his story. However, the Duke of Westminster himself was a fan of Steiner's music, and he obtained papers to allow him and his wife to leave immediately for America. However, his property, his land and his money were confiscated. So Steiner and his wife arrived in New York in December of 1914 with a total of $32 to their names. Nowhere to live, no jobs, but at least they had their freedom. So Steiner got a job orchestrating musicals, which was all he could get at the time. And because he was a musical genius, his reputation grew swiftly until he was being asked to score Broadway musicals, and his reputation was golden. Now, from 1929 to 1937, he worked for RKO Pictures, first as an orchestrator and then as a composer. And whilst he was working for RKO, he was asked to work on a particular picture, one that itself was going to change movies forever. And it was this little picture here, King Kong. Now, this was a breakthrough picture in so many ways, not just from the musical point of view, but also from the way it was made and for its incredible, for the time, special effects, most notably overseen by the great Ray Harryhausen, whose special effects we all grew up watching and enjoying. His work with stop motion animation changed movies forever. but it wasn't an immediate success, at least not in terms of the studio. The studio didn't like the special effects. They didn't like the story. And it was really quite clear when they were watching the rushes that the audience were being asked to make a huge leap of faith in order to understand, to believe, and even to sympathize with this character of King Kong, which itself was an animated puppet, effectively. And so the score became a key part of the film. It added realism to an unrealistic film plot. And the studio's bosses, as I said, were very skeptical about the special effects. They were also initially skeptical about the need for an original score. They suggested using old tracks, maybe classical music, to save on the cost of the film. However, the producer of King Kong, a chap called Merriam C. Cooper, asked Max Steiner to score the film and said he would pay for the orchestra. And the studio agreed in order to do this. And I think the producer was a visionary at this point. He knew the power of music and it would unlock the film for audiences. Now, Steiner took advantage of this offer and used an 80-piece orchestra, the largest orchestra that had been used for any film score up until that point. He explained the film was made for music. According to Steiner, it was the kind of film that allowed you to do anything and everything, from weird chords and dissonances to beautiful melodies. He wrote the score in a total of 2 weeks, and the recording session alone cost around $50,000 in 1933. That's quite steep. Now, Steiner, with his classical, particularly this Austro-German romantic background, brought all the techniques of that era, plus, vitally, the techniques of German opera, most notably that of Wagner, whose music we discussed recently here on the channel. If you remember, Wagner pioneered several techniques in his operas, including Gesamtkunstwerk, which was the complete art form, combining music with art and drama and movement and acting, which of course is exactly what King Kong was, as well as leitmotif, this idea of these individual tunes which are associated with individual characters. And Steiner brought these techniques to bear with King Kong, the first time this had ever been done. And so this landmark of film scoring showed the power music has to manipulate emotions. Let's look at the first leitmotif here. I'm going to make sure I'm not using the mighty Wurlitzer for this. So this is Kong's leitmotif, this 50-foot gorilla, and you can hear the 50-foot gorilla in every millisecond of this. So much power in 3 notes, chromatically descending, all in the bass. It gives you that real sense of character, majesty, danger, threat, everything you needed. This was scored with the low brass and the low strings to give you these ominous 3 notes and give the audience a sense of expectation in what's to come in terms of both scope and terror. And this actually opens the overture, the opening credits to King Kong, which we're going to watch in just a moment. So you hear these threatening 3 notes, which then is followed by a brief fanfare before the music continues with a reference to the stolen love theme. Now, this is the movie's heroine, who's called Anne Darrow, played by the legendary Fay Wray. And her leitmotif is on the upper strings, and it is very closely related to the Kong theme. It has the descending chromatic notes, but then a little scoop and a yearning figure at the end. So that is what comes after Kong. You have Kong, you have a fanfare, you have this grand, soaring, stolen love theme for the Anne Darrow / Fay Wray character. You then hear the jungle dance, which is the music that's first heard on Skull Island when the main characters first land. So after the jungle dance and a second fanfare, as the credits fade and a quote about Beauty and the Beast fades up, you hear the Kong leitmotif return, but this time it's scored in a much more soft, lush and romantic fashion. And with this, before there's even a frame of moving action on screen, we have a journey. Kong in the beginning is threatening. He meets Anne Darrow, and he becomes a different character. He becomes sympathetic. And we learn all of this through the music without having to see anything on screen. And Steiner took these motifs and they constantly evolve throughout the music. They dramatically underscore the action and they make this almost impossible task of making a 50-foot tall animated gorilla into a sympathetic figure. They make this a realistic goal. And it's mainly because we as the audience are moved and in some ways manipulated by this musical score. So let's watch the opening titles to King Kong. And this comes from the Fabulous Movie Clips channel. Please go and watch this and do subscribe to their channel afterwards. We're very grateful for them putting these clips up. And listen out for each of these leitmotifs, particularly the Kong motif, which is threatening to begin with and then becomes lush and more sympathetic. Here we go. Just all the love thing. Now the jungle dance. Big fanfare. And now, listen, here's the leitmotif, but... So, as I say, within a matter of 2 minutes, you are introduced to all of the leitmotifs that you're going to need, and there's even some character development before you've seen a single scene. Now, I know some of you have never seen King Kong. I really do thoroughly recommend it to you. It is a remarkable film. The effects, even today, nearly 100 years later, still stand up, and it is still a really fascinating and compelling film. Obviously, it's obvious that it is not a real gorilla, but when you consider this is one of the first effectively science fiction fantasy films ever made, it was a landmark film. It changed the way we thought about motion pictures and ushered in a complete new era. Now, at the very end, spoiler alert, but very famously, Kong climbs the Empire State Building to try and get away with the Fay Ray character, with Ann Darrow, and is shot by biplanes, and he falls tragically to his death. Now, the music at this point takes on a completely different character. We have come to know, appreciate, and even have some fondness for Kong, who's been horribly mistreated. And it's a bit like the Frankenstein story, where the monster, to begin with, is threatening, but we feel sympathy and empathy for it by the end. And so the music takes on a tragic turn. The two themes of Kong and the stolen love, that's the Ann Darrow character, they interweave because they've become friends, they've become companions. They are Beauty and the Beast. And as we watch this scene as Kong falls from the Empire State Building, again, the score says so much. You hear the descending notes as he falls. You even, without having to see Kong land on the sidewalk, you hear it in the score. And then at the very, very end, the immortal line, but it was Beauty that killed the Beast. This Kong leitmotif is treated with such tragedy and such pathos. People were crying in the theatre for this animated 50-foot gorilla. So let's watch the very last scene from King Kong, and I would thoroughly urge you all to watch the whole thing. Here we go. There was a little burst of that stolen love leitmotif. That solo violin with a little bit of Andorra's music.
Let me through, officer. My name's Denham.
Just a moment. Oh, Lieutenant.
Lieutenant, I'm Carl Denham. Carl Denham?
Denham? Oh, that's the man that captured the monster.
Well, Denham, the airplane's got him. Oh, no. It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
There you are. So, everyone, that is a little bit of King Kong, a landmark score. Changed the way we thought of cinema, but that was not all that Max Steiner was going to do for our enjoyment, everyone. Steiner invented some of the techniques that are still used today. In fact, many of you, if you've ever recorded for Homechoir, Choir of the Earth, you have used a technique that Steiner invented. The level of precision for the music that Steiner was required to create was very, very hard to achieve with the technology there in the 1930s. So Steiner took his copy of the film that he was scoring to and used a pin to put small holes in the cells at regular intervals. This created a click in the projector, which he could use to write the music to. And later on, he could use that same click to conduct the orchestra when it was recorded. So Max Steiner, completely by himself, without being asked to, developed and created the first click track. And he went on to compose for over 300 movies, became a legendary composer. His scores for films such as Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, A Summer Place, Now Voyager, The Searchers, and so many more are considered absolute cornerstones of the genre. So thank you, Max, for an amazing career. Now, we will continue our exploration of this fascinating topic next week in part 3. With the story of an amazing composer who was perhaps the greatest of all film composers in the Golden Age. His name was Erich Wolfgang Korngold. And it's fair to say that Robin Hood quite literally saved the life of this man and his family. And his impact on film music cannot be understated. I want to play you, just to finish today, I want to play you a little bit of a fanfare from a film called King's Row, which starred, amongst other people, Ronald Reagan, who, I wonder what happened to him. But if you ever listen to this... think that sounds familiar. What about this? Absolutely. Without Korngold, we would have none of the big movie sounds and the big movie scores by John Williams and others. So do join me next week for the third thrilling instalment of the deep dives, the classical origins of film music. I really hope you enjoyed today. If you have, please do consider hitting the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and do share this with everyone, as we want as many people as possible to come and enjoy learning about and sharing the excitement of music. Now, can I also ask if it is possible, if you could please put your seats up, make sure you pick up all of your litter around you, popcorn wrappers and so on, because we need to get the next people in for the next showing. And one more time, do please go and support the channels whose clips have enhanced our broadcast today. All the links are in the description, and I think it's a fascinating journey to go and explore to keep you on the edge of your seat, ready for part 3 next week. But in the meantime, I'll be back on Fun Friday. We have a superb program this week with Mango, and much, much more. And of course, Sunday, we've got our Sing Sunday for something completely different. But in the meantime, I'm going to see you soon. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.